What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the third person and action RPG tutorial series, we are going to be going over improved movement yet again. So this time what we're going to be covering is faster crouch walking as well as better movement management for our speeds and things like that, because we're using a lot of hard-coded numbers and some arbitrary logic, and we can clean a lot of this up very simply. So we should do so before we get any farther into movement, like some things I'd like to cover are vaulting, mantling, double jumping. And a lot of these become significantly easier if our movement system is solid. So first things first, in this series I am able to crouch and walk. And then if I press the sprint key, I actually am going to start crouch walking a little bit faster. This is by design. Previously I was crouch walking the same speed as I was sprinting when I would press the sprint button while crouch, which I want to fix. I don't want to have it that way for the game, because if I do, then we can crouch and sprint and we run super fast, whereas a standing sprint should be a lot faster. This will also fix up the animations for the crouch walking, just to make it look a little bit better, because it didn't really line up with our movement, so there's an added bonus there. And like I said, we're going to do some cleanup to make sure that all of our speeds are set up in our code and we're not using arbitrary values or hard-coded logic anywhere. That way we don't have to worry about this stuff later. So it's a super simple episode, but it is genuinely a very important one. One other thing, I will be fixing an issue with enhanced input that had come up if you were following my blueprint only input buffer series and were using your third person action RPG for that. There was a little thing that I missed with crouching with the enhanced input, so I could no longer do it while using that method. Just in case you happen to be following my series directly, I want to fix that up, just so you're not running into that problem. If you want to get caught up into the entire series before checking this out, you can see how we've done things like equip items from our inventory into our character's hands, lock onto characters, and add quests to our game. I'll link you to that playlist and all the episodes in the third-person action RPG tutorial series right here in the top right corner. Alternatively, if you only care about the movement states, the crouching movement, that sort of thing, I will link you to the first episode where we went over some of these movement states, because I believe our movement system is pretty good at the moment, even though we have more to go. So you'll want to start from that same point, or at least have an idea of how we set this up so you know how to set it up in your game. With that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. So this is a code and blueprint tutorial series. We're going to be doing everything in the code today, except we're going to be fixing one issue in the blueprint. First things first, let's go ahead and fix the crouching inputs for those of you using enhanced input if you're following the blueprint only input buffer. We can just go to our base character BP for this. In our base character BP, since it was the blueprint only input buffer, we had these input actions set up here for our regular input actions and our enhanced input actions. In this series, I was showing you how you could implement crouch, and so we had this input action crouch section right here that we were doing in the blueprint, and we were handling it appropriately for the blueprint only input buffer. However, this input action crouch is on the base character blueprint, so it fires after the code class input, and so the character wouldn't actually be receiving the crouch input. If we click on this input action and go over to the right here, we can disable override parent binding, which means it will allow the parent binding, or the code class, to still perform the crouch logic that we set up in the third person action RPG series, and that way it won't get in the way of this. And you'll see for the other input actions I have done this, but for whatever reason I never did it on the crouch, and so we couldn't actually crouch. So just make sure not to forget that. Now if that doesn't apply to you, then don't worry, you don't have to do anything at this step. But either way, we're good to go in the base character BP. Now where we want to go is to our third person tutorial character in the code. Third person tutorial character.cpp, if we scroll down to our start sprinting and stop sprinting functions, we can get set up with our crouch sprint behavior. So previously, this is what the sprint function looked like. We were making sure to see that there was no menu open. If there wasn't, we wanted to make sure that the character was not dead and they weren't in certain movement states, such as rolling or interacting with an NPC. So we can't sprint if we're doing any of these things. And then assuming we're in a state where we can sprint, we have to make sure we have the stamina to do so. After that, we can officially say that we're sprinting. So we were logging it out, we were disabling zooming in or aiming down sights, because at this point we were saying we can't do both at the same time. So is zoomed in was false. Is able to sprint was true at this point, because everything else has been checked and we've reset all necessary variables. Then we were setting the character's max movement speed to 1500.0f. This was our sprinting speed. I'm going to update this logic today with this logic right here. So this logic you see here, where we're updating the max walk speed, we can comment it out. In fact, in my case, I'm just going to remove it and replace it with this section right here. Since I can sprint while I'm walking, or sprint while I'm crouching, or really fast walk while I'm crouching, then I don't want to just have one speed. I want to have one speed for the sprinting and one speed for the crouch sprinting. But to determine this, we have to know if we're crouching or not. That way we can set our speed properly. So the first thing I'm doing here is adding an if statement. If not is crouching. So if we're not crouching, we're going to do the line that we had just up above. So set the character's maximum movement to sprinting speed. So get character movement, max walk speed equals 1500.0f. This is an arbitrary value I picked. This is what we will be replacing with variables later in this episode. Else, if we are crouching, then we'll go into this statement here, and we want to set the character's maximum movement speed to the crouch sprinting speed. So get character movement, max walk speed equals 600.0f. Again, this is another arbitrary value that I've chosen, but you'll see it's significantly slower than the sprinting speed. However, it's faster than the regular crouch walk speed, because regular crouch walk speed, if we go to start crouching, is 300. Our regular walking speed is 600. So this is just a coincidence that the crouch sprint is 600 and the walking speed is 600. They don't have to be the same. To prove it to you, I can go ahead and change this, and the crouch running speed can be 500, slightly slower than the regular walking speed. But whatever value you want here, it doesn't really matter. You can pick it for your game and make sure you use what's right for you. We need 4 different speeds though. We need a standard walking speed, a sprinting speed, a crouch walking speed, and a crouch sprinting speed. So these 4 values are things we can put into variables. If we go up into our third person tutorial character.h and scroll down to our variables, and specifically our floats here, I've added 4 new variables for today's episode. So again, maximum walking speed of the character, maximum crouch walking speed of the character, maximum sprinting speed of the character, maximum crouch sprinting speed of the character. All these 4 variables are going to look very similar. They're 4 floats, and they're going to have a U property of edit anywhere, blueprint read write with a category of movement. This U property just allows us to see the variable in the blueprint, edit it, use it how we want, and the category just allows us to find it more easily. So float max walk speed, max crouch walk speed, and float max sprint speed, and float max crouch sprint speed. Now, the character movement component on the character does have a max walk speed already, and yes, you can just assign that, but it's good to have variables for these things because if we want to update the defaults to switch back and forth to, it's good to store those values in a variable. If you want to have upgradable maximum movement speeds, you could change these values, which then can be referenced at any point to change the character movement's max walk speed. And this is just one way of handling this, but I do think this is very easy to expand upon in the future, and that's why I like doing it this way. So now that we have these 4 variables, we want to go into the third person tutorial character.cpp and go to the constructor, where we set the default values for variables. I'm going to scroll down to my float variables, and I'm going to add them here. So I will put them right here below interact distance. These will be our movement ones. First one is max walk speed. We want to set this to a value that matches what we currently have in the game. So I know for a fact it's 600.0f, and I get this value because if I scroll down to my stop crouching function and my stop sprinting function, so here's stop sprinting. Once we're done sprinting, we set the max walk speed back to 600 because that's the default. Same with stop crouching. When we're done crouching, we were setting the character movement speed back to 600. So max walk speed equals 600. Next one, max crouch walk speed equals. Let's do 300 because that's what I have when we enter the crouching state. So if I scroll down here to our start crouching function, you see when we start crouching, we set the character's walk speed to 300.0f. Now we have max sprinting speed, max sprint speed. And for this one, it was 1500.0f, more than double the walking speed. If we scroll down to our start sprinting function, or just sprint right here, you'll see that when we're just walk sprinting, or not crouch sprinting, just standard sprinting, we're using 1500. And the last one is going to be our crouch sprint speed, so max crouch sprint speed. And I had set it to 500 earlier in this episode. That way it was a different number from our walk speed, just to prove a point. But again, we go to our sprint function and we look at the condition where we are crouching when pressing this button, and we set it to 500. Once we have these variables set up, we can go ahead and replace any instances of these hard-coded numbers with these variables. You could even Control F and find it. You shouldn't have too many of these numbers. I do happen to know where they're all at, because I already looked at it before this episode, but if we just Control F and search, that also works as well. So stop sprinting. This is when we want to return to our regular speed. So we're going to set this to our max walk speed right here. Max walk speed instead of 600. Then whenever we change our max walk speed, this will update. We don't have hard-coded numbers in our logic. In stop crouching, we also set the max walk speed back to 600 because when we stop crouching, we're assuming we're walking again. So we want to update this value to be max walk speed. Now, this other one is a special case here. This is stop zoom, or stop aiming down sights. When we aim down sights, we were causing the character to walk a little bit slower because it's like they're focusing and they're not moving as fast. When we stop zoom, we want to reset them back to their default max walk speed. So we're just going to update this 600 with max walk speed. Now we can go back up to the list here and continue on. So max crouch walk speed is 300, so we can search for 300.0f. This is unrelated. This is the target arm length. This is the constructor variable. In start crouching, we set it to be 300.0f, and it makes sense that we'd want to replace this with our max crouch walk speed, because we're crouching at this point. Now, when we zoom in or aim down sights, we were setting the max walk speed to 300. This is our crouch speed, but I don't want that. I'm going to make another variable for aiming down sights. So if we scroll down to our variables, let's make a new one here. The maximum zooming in, aiming down sights, movement speed of the character. And we can take the same U property, edit anywhere, blueprint, read, write, the category of movement. This is going to be float max aim speed. I don't really want to call that max zoom speed, even though we refer to it as zooming in a lot of places, because this kind of seems like the zoom in speed, the actual speed of going from the non-zoomed in to the zoomed in state. So max aim speed. And actually we'll say max aim walk speed. I think it's okay not to change the speed of the character while they're aiming and crouching. I think that's okay because crouching is a more stable stance in a lot of cases, or for a lot of games. So we'll keep it like that for now. So we want to change the 300 and the zoom in function to our max aim walk speed. And in here, we're going to want to set that value. So below max crouch sprint speed, we're going to say max aim walk speed. And let's change it to a different value, again, just for proof of concept here. Let's do 400. That way it's completely unique. Now we have our 1500 here. And this only shows up in the sprinting function, so we want to update the 1500 to our max sprint speed. Then we have our max crouch sprint speed, which is 500, and this only shows up in the sprint function as well in the other condition. We want to update this to max crouch sprint speed. And there we go. Now all of our movement is cleaned up nice and simple. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this episode. If it helped you improve your movement, your sprinting states, your movement states, then please subscribe. I'd really appreciate it, and it means more to me than you could know. It helps out the channel a lot, and it keeps you updated with more episodes coming out in this series. If you're interested in supporting me further, you can check out the Patreon, YouTube membership, or Discord subscriptions like a lot of consoles have. We also have merch available if you're interested in that. If you ran into any problems while following this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I'd be happy to help you out. There's a link in the description if you want that assistance. Otherwise, guys, that's all I got. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.